Hi everyone, and welcome back to Herzography. In this video I'm going to show you how I do my calculations when I'm doing a long exposure with a really dark neutral density filter. They can be a little bit hard to handle and trying to figure out the math in doing these calculations. And back when I used to use dark NDs, it was with a pad of paper and you're trying to make the calculation. Okay, now I got to double and double and double and trying to figure out what that exposure is, as well as how do I set that up on my camera as I'm trying to focus and that sort of thing. So here's the process that I kind of go through. It's become much simpler in today's realm with using mirrorless cameras than it ever has been before. So here's the process step by step that I kind of go through. I will go ahead and, of course, first I'm going to compose and get everything set up, and my camera's going to be on a tripod. I don't recommend this unless you had to, doing this where it's, you're set up on a rock or something like that, because it's going to be a long exposure. You can't have anything moving or vibrating. So let's say you're all set up on a tripod and you are setting this up and you get your exposure all set, and let's say your exposure is set up, and I'm going to make this up, that right now I'm set up at a 20th of a second. So okay, so I'm set up at a 20th of a second, and I've decided that I'm going to start with this filter here, which is a 15 stop. The 10 stop is all right, but in this particular case, I want a lot more movement in, maybe not the water as much, but let's say in the clouds, and I want a really good dramatic cloud effect. Or there's some buildings in the foreground and I want the water to be really silky smooth. So I need to go with a really long exposure. So in this case, I'm using an app here that's called NDTimer. And in NDTimer, I go in and I say, okay, this is my starting exposure here. So my starting exposure is set right now at a 20th of a second. And I will then just turn this up to 15 stops, and I'll see that right now it's going to be a 27-minute and 18-second exposure. So I'm getting a really nice, good long exposure. Now, if I say that, let's say that's too long of an exposure, then I might want to adjust probably my ISO. And if I just adjust my ISO and it brings us more to a, let's say 1/25th of a second based on my ISO that I've adjusted in camera, now I can see that if I'm using the 15 stop, it's going to give me a 4-minute exposure. Probably a little bit easier to handle, but I might want to now make this adjustment to maybe have a 10-minute exposure. So I'll readjust my ISO so that it's normally a 1/50th of a second exposure, and then when I put this filter on, I'm going to be taking a 10-minute 55-second exposure. So then my camera's all set up, I put this filter on and take the exposure. Now the nice thing about this particular application, and many others have that, is I can hit start timer right when I hit the shutter button for that long exposure time. So in this case, I would set the camera on bulb, so that way it's going to stay open for as long as I need it to, and then hit the shutter release button again after this timer has gone ahead and counted down. So using this timer does make it, or this application does make using these dark filters much easier to use than using, let's say, the timer in the camera, because the timer in the camera is usually set for certain ranges. I'm not going to be able to get it exact to 10 minutes and 55 seconds or even 11 minutes. So that's why I like using an application like this that will make the whole process go much easier in being able to set that timer. Now, of course, as you get into these really dark filters, here's a 20 stop. So it makes it very simple to just say, okay, 20 stop. And as you can see, now the exposure is getting fairly long because we're always doubling the amount of time as we increase the neutral density to these greater densities. So this one here is an 18 stop. Yeah, it's not a big difference, but it can make somewhat of a difference in here, because you'll see now I'm at an hour and 20 minutes. So I might say, no, I need to increase my ISO. I think I want to stick closer to maybe a shorter exposure time of somewhere around 10 minutes. That might be 10 or 11 minutes. So you see I'm back to 10 or 11 minutes with this filter at 18 stop versus 15 stop, depending upon what ISO you're willing to shoot at. So that's where you have to make compromises in deciding how many filters do I get, because how dark do I want to go? What else can I use the filter for? For someone like myself, I like the flexibility of using some of these different filters depending upon how bright it is outside and how much I want to reduce movement and get that silky look, let's say on the water, or the clouds aren't moving that fast and I'm going to have to keep my my shutter open longer, so I might decide on a different filter. Now, that being said, there is a setting in the camera that I recommend for myself, and I turn it off, and that is noise reduction for long exposures. Noise reduction for long exposures came back from when we used to shoot, like when you're shooting on with a phase 1 back, in that we always try to subtract the noise that you would get during the long exposures. But the only way a camera can do that is to create a second exposure after your first exposure and have that second exposure have nothing there. It is what we call a dark screen calibration, and it calibrates the exposure for the same amount of time and subtracts it from your initial exposure. So what that means is that if you take an 11-minute exposure and you have noise reduction on, your camera is going to take another image. It doesn't really take an image, it just takes another 11 minutes of dark screen exposure to then come up with that whatever noise there could be on your sensor, and subtracts that from your first image. You know what? It's great in theory, but if you're out somewhere and let's say it's cold, or let's say you're ready to go, well, now your camera is doing a second exposure and you can't move anything. Your camera has to stay in that exact spot for the same amount of time as your first exposure. Personally, I don't care to do that. I would rather take the time in post-production and subtract any noise. There's a lot of noise reduction programs out there, as well as what's built into Lightroom, that do a great job. And I need my time out in the field spent shooting and not waiting for the camera to do this dark screen calibration. So I have my noise reduction turned off in my camera, so I don't have to think about it while I'm out shooting. So that's what that setting is for when you're doing these long exposures. So that being said, these dark filters are absolutely wonderful. These dark neutral density filters, I love these ones from Maven. They have strong magnetic rings on them. You saw I was going like this trying to get it off afterwards, and you can hear it snap into place really well. And I don't ever have to think about this filter coming off while it's on my lens. So I highly recommend these. I'll have links below to all these different filters. There are some sets available from Maven if you want to get a set of a bunch of neutral density filters. They're very light, easy to travel with, and I find them to be just an invaluable set. I keep mine with a front cap and a rear cap, on them like this. So that way it makes it very easy for me to just throw this in my pocket. I'm going somewhere and I might want to do a long exposure. Of course, I've always got my phone with me, so just having these two things makes just taking these long exposures really simple and easy. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on using dark neutral density filters, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video again real soon. Bye for now.